The coffee mug shattered against the diner floor as Claire Johnson watched her world crumble around her. The health inspector stood over the broken pieces with a satisfied smirk, his clipboard thick with fabricated violations. Behind him, 3 men in expensive suits whispered among themselves, their eyes scanning her husband's beloved diner like predators sizing up wounded prey. Rodent droppings in the storage room, the inspector announced loudly, though Claire knew she'd scrubbed every inch of that space just yesterday. Grease buildup on the vents that poses a fire hazard. Temperature violations in the walk-in cooler. Each lie hit her like a physical blow. The morning rush crowd that used to fill every red vinyl booth had dwindled to just old Mr. Peterson in the corner, nervously sipping his coffee while avoiding eye contact. The other customers had fled when the inspector started his theatrical performance, shaking his head and making dramatic notes. "This establishment needs to be shut down immediately," the inspector continued, his voice carrying across the empty diner. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but these violations are too serious to ignore." Claire's hands trembled as she reached for the broom, but her legs felt like water. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Not to the place Tom had built with his own hands, board by board, dream by dream. Not to the diner where they'd shared their first dance on opening night, where he'd kissed her every morning before the first customer arrived. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can fix whatever's wrong. Just give me a chance." The tallest man in the suit stepped forward, his smile cold as winter. "Mrs. Johnson, isn't it? I'm Richard Blackwood from Pinnacle Development. Perhaps we can help each other out here." He gestured around the diner with mock sympathy. "This old place has seen better days. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer well above market value." Claire's stomach turned. She'd heard about Pinnacle Development from other business owners on the Strip. They swooped in like vultures, using code violations and mysterious problems to force people out, then bought their properties for pennies on the dollar. "The diner isn't for sale," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Blackwood's smile never wavered. "Mrs. Johnson, be reasonable. Look around you. No customers, mounting violations, property taxes going up every month. How long can you really hold on?" As if summoned by his words, the bell above the door chimed. Claire's heart sank as 2 more official-looking people entered, a woman with a briefcase and a man with a badge. The woman approached with papers in her hand. "Claire Johnson? I'm Janet Mills from the county tax office. You're 3 months behind on your property taxes. We're here to discuss immediate payment or seizure of assets." The room started spinning. Claire gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white against the old Formica surface. 3 months behind? She'd been so careful with the books, but the customers had been disappearing week by week. First, the parking lot had developed mysterious potholes that never seemed to get fixed despite her calls to the city. Then the streetlight outside had gone out, making the diner look closed after sunset. Health inspectors had started showing up weekly, always finding new problems that hadn't existed the day before. I need time," Claire stammered. "The insurance money from my husband's accident, it should come through soon." "Ma'am," the tax official said with practiced indifference, "you have 72 hours to pay in full or we begin seizure proceedings." Mr. Peterson quietly left a $5 bill on his table and hurried out without finishing his coffee. Claire was now completely alone with her tormentors. Blackwood stepped closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a sympathetic tone. "Mrs. Johnson, we're not the bad guys here. We're trying to help. Our offer stands: we'll pay your back taxes, cover all the violation fines, and still give you enough to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere easier." "This diner is my life," Claire said, her voice cracking. "My husband died building this place. I won't just walk away." "Your husband is gone," Blackwood said bluntly. "Holding on to the past won't bring him back. It'll just drag you down with it." The words hit Claire like a slap. She felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not in front of these people. Not when they were trying to destroy everything Tom had worked for. The health inspector was already taping a large red notice to the front window. "Closed by order of health department." The bold letters seemed to mock her as they caught the afternoon sunlight. "You have until Friday to respond to our offer," Blackwood said, placing his business card on the counter. "After that, well, these government processes can get very complicated. Very expensive." As the group filed out, their satisfied chatter fading into the street noise, Claire finally allowed herself to collapse onto one of the counter stools. The silence in the diner was deafening. No sizzling grill, no clinking silverware, no friendly conversation. Just the hum of the old refrigerator and the tick of the clock Tom had bought for their first anniversary. She looked around at the empty booths, each one holding memories. The corner table where the Henderson family came every Sunday after church. The counter where Eddie the mechanic ate his lunch and told her about his granddaughter's baseball games. The booth by the window where she and Tom used to sit during slow afternoons, planning their future together. The future that had died with him in that car accident 6 months ago. Claire picked up Blackwood's business card, her hands shaking with rage and desperation. The paper felt heavy in her fingers, like it carried the weight of surrender. She thought about Tom's last words to her in the hospital. "Keep the diner going, sweetheart. It's our legacy. It's how we'll help people even when I'm gone." But how could she keep fighting when everything seemed stacked against her? The violations were fake, but fighting them would cost money she didn't have. The property taxes were real and growing every month. The customers were staying away because of the harassment and bad publicity. She walked to the window and stared out at the empty parking lot. Across the street, a massive billboard advertised luxury condominiums coming soon. The artist's rendering showed sleek glass towers where the old neighborhood shops currently stood. Progress, they called it. Claire called it destruction. Her reflection stared back from the window glass, a young woman who looked far older than her 28 years. Dark circles under her brown eyes, worry lines creasing her forehead, her natural hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that had come loose during the morning's chaos. She barely recognized herself anymore. The bell above the door chimed again, and Claire's heart jumped with hope. A customer? But when she turned, it was just the wind blowing the door open. The latch had been broken for weeks and she hadn't had the money to fix it. She walked back to the counter and opened the cash register. $37.53. That was all that stood between her and complete ruin. Tom's life insurance was tied up in legal proceedings, the diner's insurance had found ways to deny her claims, and her savings had been drained keeping the lights on. Claire sank down behind the counter and finally let the tears come. They fell onto Tom's old apron, the one she still wore every day because it smelled faintly of his cologne and the spices he loved to cook with. She buried her face in the worn fabric and sobbed for everything she'd lost, everything she was about to lose. The phone rang, cutting through her despair. She almost didn't answer it, but something made her reach for it on the fourth ring. "Hello, Sunrise Diner," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Is this Claire Johnson?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional but not unkind. "Yes, this is Claire. Mrs. Johnson, this is Patricia Wong from Metro Insurance. I'm calling about your husband's policy claim. I have some news." Claire's heart stopped. "What kind of news?" "Good news, I hope. We've completed our investigation, and we're prepared to release the full benefit amount. The check will be in the mail today." For a moment, Claire couldn't speak. The insurance money. It was enough to pay the back taxes, maybe even cover some of the violation fines. It wouldn't solve everything, but it might buy her time. "Mrs. Johnson? Are you there?" "Yes, I'm here. Thank you." "Thank you so much. You should receive it within 3 business days. Again, I'm sorry for your loss and the delay in processing." Claire hung up the phone and looked around the diner with new eyes. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe Tom was still looking out for her somehow. She walked to the window and slowly, deliberately, peeled off the health department's closure notice. Let them come back. Let them try again. She wasn't giving up without a fight. The diner might be empty now, but it wouldn't stay that way. Somehow, some way she was going to save the place Tom had built with love and dreams. She owed him that much. She owed herself that much. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor, Claire began planning her comeback. She didn't know that across town, a man she'd never met was about to discover a secret that would change both their lives forever. The fight for Sunrise Diner was just beginning. The insurance check arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a postal worker who barely glanced at Claire as she signed for it. Her hands shook as she tore open the envelope, revealing the number she'd memorized from sleepless nights of calculation. $53,000. It was exactly what she needed to pay the back taxes and cover the immediate violations, but it would leave her with almost nothing for operating expenses. Claire sat in the empty diner, the check spread flat on the counter beside Tom's old calculator. The same calculator he'd used to figure out their first business loan, to plan their menu pricing, to dream about expanding to a second location someday. Now she was using it to calculate survival, not success. The silence felt different today. Not the comfortable quiet of early morning preparation, but the hollow emptiness of a place forgotten. She'd been closed for 3 days now, and already the neighborhood felt like it was moving on without her. People walked past the diner without even glancing at the darkened windows. She thought about Tom's face the day they'd signed the lease on this building. He'd been so proud, showing her every corner, explaining his plans for the kitchen layout, the seating arrangement, the little details that would make their diner special. "We're not just serving food," he'd said, his eyes bright with possibility. "We're creating a community. A place where people can belong." The community had been real once. Mrs. Garcia from the flower shop next door used to bring her morning coffee here and tell Claire about her grandchildren. Officer Rodriguez would stop by during his beat, checking on the neighborhood while enjoying Tom's famous pancakes. The Thursday night book club met in the back booth for 2 years running, their discussions growing louder and more animated as the evening wore on. But one by one they'd stopped coming. Mrs. Garcia's flower shop had closed after a sudden rent increase. Officer Rodriguez had been reassigned to a different district. The book club members found excuses to meet elsewhere after the parking lot problems started. Claire walked to the kitchen, running her hand along the stainless steel prep counter Tom had installed himself. He'd worked 3 jobs to afford the down payment on this equipment, coming home exhausted but excited, talking about recipes he wanted to try, specials he wanted to feature. His dreams had been infectious, pulling her into a future she'd never imagined for herself. She'd been working as a secretary at a law firm when they met. Steady work, steady pay, no particular passion for it but no complaints either. Tom had changed all that. He'd shown her what it meant to build something with your own hands, to create joy in other people's lives through simple acts of service. The walk-in cooler hummed in the corner, mostly empty now except for a few containers of ingredients she hadn't had the heart to throw away. Tom's signature burger seasoning. The special pancake batter recipe he'd perfected through months of experimentation. The pie fillings that had made their dessert menu locally famous. She opened one of the containers and breathed in the familiar smell of cinnamon and vanilla. Tom's apple pie filling. He'd learned the recipe from his grandmother, then spent hours adjusting it until it was perfect. Comfort food should actually provide comfort, he'd always said. Not just fill you up but make you feel better about the world. The bell above the door chimed, and Claire quickly wiped her eyes before turning around. A woman in a business suit stood in the doorway, looking around with obvious disapproval. "I'm sorry, we're temporarily closed," Claire said, walking back to the front counter. "I can see that," the woman replied coolly. "I'm Linda Marsh from the city planning office. I understand you've had some compliance issues." Claire's stomach tightened. Another official visit. Another problem to solve with money she didn't have. "The health department violations have been addressed," Claire said carefully. "I'm not here about health violations. I'm here about zoning compliance." Linda Marsh pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what looked like a long list. "This property is zoned for commercial food service, but there are specific requirements about parking availability, noise levels, and impact on residential neighbors. We've been operating here for 4 years without any problems. Zoning requirements change, Mrs. Johnson. The city is growing and we need to ensure all businesses meet current standards." Linda looked around the diner with the same predatory assessment Claire had seen from the development company. "I'm afraid this location may no longer be suitable for restaurant operations." Claire felt the familiar weight of despair settling on her shoulders. Every time she thought she'd identified all the obstacles, new ones appeared. It was like fighting a hydra. Cut off one head and 2 more grew back. "What would I need to do to maintain compliance?" Linda consulted her tablet again. "Parking lot expansion to accommodate at least 15 vehicles. Sound dampening materials for the kitchen equipment. Updated ventilation system meeting 2024 commercial standards. Landscape buffer between the property and the residential area behind you." Each requirement felt like another nail in the diner's coffin. Claire didn't need to ask about cost. She could see the dollar signs adding up to far more than her insurance check could cover. "And if I can't meet these requirements? Then the city would be forced to revoke your business license." Linda's tone suggested this outcome wouldn't particularly disturb her sleep. "Of course, if you're planning to sell the property anyway, these compliance issues would become the buyer's responsibility." There was again the assumption that Claire would just give up and walk away. That Tom's dream, their shared vision, was disposable when it became inconvenient. "I'm not selling," Claire said firmly. Linda shrugged as if the decision were merely postponing the inevitable. "The compliance assessment will be completed within 30 days. You'll receive a formal notice with specific timelines for corrections." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Johnson, I understand this is difficult, but sometimes the best thing we can do is accept when it's time to move on." After Linda left, Claire locked the door and turned the sign to closed. She walked back to the kitchen and sat on the floor beside the prep counter, her back against the cool metal of the dishwasher. This was where she'd found Tom the morning after they'd first opened, sitting in exactly the same spot with tears of joy streaming down his face. "We did it, Claire," he'd whispered, pulling her down beside him. "We actually did it. We built something real." She could still feel the warmth of his arms around her, the certainty in his voice that they could handle whatever challenges came their way. Together they'd felt invincible. Apart she felt like she was drowning in quicksand. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. Somewhere in the distance she could hear the sound of construction equipment. More progress. More change. More reasons for small businesses like hers to disappear. Claire pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Tom's best friend, Jake Morrison. He'd been asking about the diner for months, offering to help in any way he could. Maybe it was time to take him up on that offer. "Jake? It's Claire. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course. How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure I am, honestly. I need advice. Real advice, not just people telling me everything will be okay." "What's going on?" Claire told him about the insurance check, the new zoning requirements, the impossible costs of compliance. She told him about the empty diner, the missing customers, the weight of fighting alone. Jake listened without interrupting, the way Tom used to when she needed to work through a problem out loud. "Claire," he finally said, "I have to ask you something, and I want you to really think about the answer. Are you fighting to save the diner because you believe it can succeed, or because you're afraid letting go means letting go of Tom?" The question hit her like cold water. She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Was she holding on to the diner out of love or out of fear? "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "That's honest. And honesty is what you need right now, not false optimism." Jake paused. "Tom loved that diner, but he loved you more. He wouldn't want you to sacrifice your future for a building. But it's not just a building. It's everything we worked for. Everything he died believing in. Tom died believing in you, Claire. In your happiness, your future, your ability to build a good life. The diner was just one way he thought that might happen." After she hung up, Claire sat in the growing darkness of the closed restaurant. Jake's words echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of Tom's voice, with the sound of sizzling bacon and percolating coffee, with the laughter of customers who'd become friends. She thought about Linda Marsh's compliance requirements. 15 parking spaces. Sound dampening. Updated ventilation. Landscape buffering. Each item represented thousands of dollars she didn't have, systems she didn't understand, problems she couldn't solve alone. But then she thought about Mrs. Garcia's face lighting up when she saw Tom's daily soup special written on the chalkboard. About Officer Rodriguez teaching the neighborhood kids to play chess at the corner table during his dinner break. About the book club's heated debates over whether Jane Austen was really a romantic or a satirist. The diner had been more than a business. It had been a gathering place, a constant in people's lives, a source of comfort and community in an increasingly disconnected world. Maybe that was worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed impossible. Claire stood up and walked to the front window, looking out at the street where Tom had proposed to her 3 years ago. Right there by the lamppost, he'd gotten down on one knee and promised her a lifetime of adventures, of building dreams together, of making the world a little bit better through small acts of love. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and made her own promise to his memory. She would find a way to save the diner. Not because she was afraid to let go, but because some dreams were too important to abandon without a real fight. Somewhere out there, she was sure, was someone who would understand what this place meant. Someone who valued community over profit, dreams over development, love over loss. She just had to find them before time ran out. The next morning, Claire arrived at the diner before sunrise, determined to make the most of whatever time she had left. She couldn't officially reopen until the health department cleared the violations, but she could use the time to deep clean, organize, and prepare for her comeback. She flipped on the lights and breathed in the familiar scent of the place, a mixture of coffee, vanilla, and the faint sweetness of Tom's signature pancake syrup that seemed to have soaked into the very walls. For the first time in days, the diner felt like home again instead of a burden. Claire tied on Tom's old apron and got to work. She scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, organized the storage room with military precision, and tested every piece of equipment to make sure it was running perfectly. If the health inspector came back, she'd find nothing to complain about. Around 9 o'clock, she heard a gentle knock on the front door. Through the glass, she could see a tall man in an expensive-looking coat, his dark hair slightly mussed by the morning wind. He gestured toward the interior of the diner with a questioning look. Claire wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door. "I'm sorry, we're still closed for repairs," she called through the glass. "I was hoping for just a cup of coffee," the man replied. His voice was calm, polite, with an undertone of something that might have been loneliness. "I understand if that's not possible." Something about his demeanor made Claire pause. He wasn't pushy like the developers or coldly official like the inspectors. He seemed genuinely disappointed, as if he'd been looking forward to this coffee more than was reasonable for a stranger. Against her better judgment, Claire unlocked the door. "I can make you coffee," she said. "But I have to warn you, we're not officially open, so if anyone asks." "I was never here," the man finished with a slight smile. "Thank you. I really appreciate this." He followed her inside, looking around the diner with an expression Claire couldn't quite read. Not the calculating assessment of a developer or the critical eye of an inspector. More like recognition, as if he'd been here before, though Claire was certain she'd never seen him. "How do you take your coffee?" she asked, moving behind the counter to start a fresh pot. "Black, please. Strong if you have it." Claire smiled. "My husband always said life's too short for weak coffee." The man settled onto one of the counter stools, watching her work with quiet attention. There was something calming about his presence, unlike every other stranger who'd entered the diner recently. "Your husband built this place?" he asked. "We built it together, but it was his dream first." Claire poured the coffee into one of their heavy ceramic mugs, the ones Tom had insisted on because real coffee needs real cups. "He died 6 months ago. Car accident. I'm sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but they carried genuine sympathy. Claire had heard those same words from dozens of people over the past months, but something in this stranger's tone made them feel personal rather than perfunctory. "Thank you. I'm Claire, by the way. Claire Johnson." "Elias," he replied, accepting the coffee mug with both hands as if it were precious. He took a sip and closed his eyes briefly. "This is perfect. Exactly what I needed." Claire poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter. There was something peaceful about sharing coffee with someone who didn't want anything from her, didn't have papers to serve or violations to cite or properties to buy. "Are you from around here?" she asked. "I grew up not far from here, actually. But I haven't been back in years." Elias looked around the diner again, that same expression of recognition crossing his features. "This neighborhood has changed a lot." "Not all for the better," Claire said, thinking about Mrs. Garcia's closed flower shop and the other small businesses that had been forced out. "You're having troubles too?" Claire found herself telling him about the health violations, the zoning requirements, the property taxes, the developers circling like sharks. She wasn't sure why she was confiding in a complete stranger, but there was something about Elias that invited honesty. "It sounds like someone's trying very hard to force you out," he observed. "That's exactly what's happening. But I can't prove it, and even if I could, I don't have the money to fight them." Elias was quiet for a moment, studying his coffee as if it contained answers to questions he hadn't asked. What would it take to save this place? Realistically? Claire had run the numbers so many times she could recite them from memory. The back taxes, the compliance costs, enough operating capital to survive while rebuilding the customer base. Probably close to $200,000. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of dreams too. Claire looked around at the empty booths, remembering them filled with laughter and conversation. This place used to be the heart of the neighborhood. People came here for more than just food. They came for community, for belonging. And you think it could be that again? I know it could. But I also know I can't do it alone. The bell above the door chimed, and Claire's heart sank as she recognized the figure entering. Richard Blackwood from Pinnacle Development, flanked by 2 associates. His smile was sharp as a knife when he spotted Claire talking to Elias. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm surprised to find you serving customers when the restaurant is officially closed." Blackwood's tone was mock concerned, as if he were doing her a favor by pointing out the violation. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm not serving customers. I'm having coffee with a friend." Blackwood's eyes flicked to Elias, taking in the expensive coat, the confident posture, the way he seemed completely unimpressed by the developer's entrance. "I don't believe we've met," Blackwood said, extending his hand toward Elias. "Richard Blackwood, Pinnacle Development." Elias looked at the offered hand for a long moment before taking it. "Elias. And what brings you to this establishment?" There was something in Blackwood's tone that made Claire's skin crawl. Condescension mixed with suspicion, as if he couldn't understand why anyone would voluntarily spend time in her diner. "The coffee," Elias replied simply. "Best I've had in years." Blackwood laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Well, I'm afraid Mrs. Johnson won't be serving much more of it." This property is changing hands very soon. Is it? Elias asked, looking at Claire. I wasn't aware it was for sale. It's not, Claire said firmly. Mrs. Johnson, be reasonable. We've discussed this. The city violations alone will cost more than this place is worth. Blackwood pulled out a folder and set it on the counter. Our offer is generous, but it won't stay on the table forever. Claire felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. Being humiliated in front of a customer, even a stranger, made the whole situation feel more real, more shameful. I've told you the diner is not for sale. Claire, Blackwood said, using her first name with false familiarity, you're a young woman with your whole life ahead of you. Don't tie yourself to a sinking ship. Take our offer and start fresh somewhere else. Elias set down his coffee mug with deliberate precision. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried an authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. Mrs. Johnson has told you twice that her property is not for sale. I think it's time you respected that answer. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. I'm sorry, but this is a private business discussion. I don't think it concerns you. Any conversation that makes a lady uncomfortable in her own establishment concerns me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Blackwood looked from Elias to Claire and back again, clearly reassessing the situation. Of course, Blackwood said, his tone shifting to false politeness. I didn't mean to intrude on your coffee date. He collected his folder from the counter. Mrs. Johnson, our offer expires Friday. I hope you'll reconsider. After the developers left, Claire felt deflated, as if their presence had sucked all the energy from the room. I'm sorry you had to see that, she said. Don't apologize. They're bullies, and bullies count on people being too embarrassed to ask for help. Claire studied Elias's face, wondering who he really was. His clothes were expensive, his manner suggested education and confidence, and something about the way he'd faced down Blackwood implied he was used to being in control. Thank you for standing up for me. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Elias finished his coffee and reached for his wallet. What do I owe you? Nothing. It was just coffee between friends. Elias smiled, and for the first time since he'd arrived, it reached all the way to his eyes. Friends? I like that. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Claire, what you said about this place being the heart of the neighborhood. That's not something you can put a price on. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. After he left, Claire stood in the empty diner, feeling strangely hopeful for the first time in weeks. She didn't know who Elias was or why he'd taken her side against the developers, but his words echoed in her mind. Some things didn't have a price. Some dreams were worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. And sometimes help came from the most unexpected places. She walked to the window and watched Elias disappear down the street, wondering if she'd ever see him again. Something told her she would. What she didn't know was that across town, Elias was already making phone calls that would change everything. Elias Kane sat in his father's study, surrounded by boxes of papers, photographs, and memories that had gathered dust for 15 years. He'd been putting off this task since the funeral 3 months ago, finding excuses to delay the emotional reckoning that came with sorting through a parent's belongings. The mansion felt too quiet without his father's presence. William Kane had been a force of nature, building his tech empire from nothing, demanding perfection from everyone around him, including his only son. Their relationship had been complicated, built on mutual respect but lacking the warmth Elias sometimes saw in other families. He opened another box, expecting more business documents or legal papers. Instead, he found photographs. Not the formal family portraits that hung in the hallway, but candid shots he'd never seen before. His father as a young man, smiling genuinely. His father with people Elias didn't recognize, in places that looked nothing like the corporate boardrooms where Elias had assumed his father spent all his time. At the bottom of the box was an envelope marked "Personal Important," in his father's careful handwriting. Inside were more photographs and a letter addressed simply to "My son." Elias unfolded the letter, his father's voice seeming to speak from the pages. Elias, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're finally going through the things I never had the courage to show you while I was alive. I need you to know about a time in my life I never talked about, a time that shaped everything I became, everything I built. Before I was William Kane, CEO and billionaire, I was Billy, a 20-year-old kid with nothing but ambition and a head full of dreams. I'd come to the city with $200 and no plan beyond making it big somehow. Within 3 months, I was broke and living on the streets. I was too proud to go home, too stubborn to admit failure. I slept in doorways, ate from garbage cans, and slowly watched my dreams die. I was disappearing, becoming invisible the way homeless people do in a city full of busy, important people who don't want to see inconvenient truths. But there was one place where I wasn't invisible. A little diner on Miller Street, where a young couple served coffee and kindness in equal measure. The woman, I never knew her name, had a rule that anyone who was hungry could wash dishes for a meal. No questions asked, no judgment given. I washed dishes there for 3 months. She fed me, let me clean up in their employee bathroom, gave me a safe place to exist when the world felt hostile and cold. She never made me feel like charity. She made me feel human. I finally got my break, a job at a tech startup that would eventually become Kane Industries. But I never forgot that diner or the woman who saved my life when I needed saving most. I drove by it sometimes over the years, wanting to go in and thank her properly, but I was always too busy, too important, too afraid that facing my past would somehow diminish what I'd become. Last month, I drove by again and saw that the diner had changed owners. The original couple was gone. I learned later that the husband had died and the wife had remarried and moved away. But the diner was still there, still serving food to people who needed it. Son, I'm telling you this because I need you to understand something about success that I never taught you properly. All the money we made, all the companies we built, all the respect we earned, none of it matters if we forget where we came from and who helped us along the way. I've left instructions in my will for a trust fund to be established for that diner. If anything ever happens to it, if the new owners ever need help, I want you to step in. Not as William Kane's son throwing money around, but as someone who understands what that place means to people who have nowhere else to go. The address is 847 Miller Street. There's a photograph in this envelope. On the back you'll find everything you need to know. I love you, Elias. I hope I taught you to be successful, but more than that, I hope you learned to be grateful. Take care of that diner. Take care of the people who carry on what that couple started all those years ago. Your father, William Kane. Elias set the letter aside with shaking hands and reached for the photograph. It was old, slightly faded, showing the exterior of a small diner with red brick walls and cheerful yellow trim. 2 people stood in front of it, a young woman with a kind smile and a man with his arm around her shoulders, both beaming with pride. Elias flipped the photo over and read the faded handwriting. Sunrise Diner, 1995. Tom and Betty Morrison, the angels who saved my life. If anything happens to me, take care of her. She fed me when I had nothing. Sunrise Diner. The same diner where he'd sat just yesterday, drinking coffee made by a woman named Claire who was fighting to save her late husband's dream. The same diner his father had watched over from a distance for 25 years, never knowing that the original owners had been replaced by another young couple with the same generous hearts. Elias stared at the photograph until his eyes blurred. His father had carried this secret his entire adult life, this debt of gratitude that had shaped his values even as success distanced him from its source. And now Claire, who had no idea she was continuing a legacy of kindness that stretched back decades, was about to lose everything. He thought about her face when those developers had cornered her, the way she'd stood her ground despite being outnumbered and outfinanced. He thought about her hands as she'd made his coffee, movements practiced and careful, serving him with the same attention she'd probably given thousands of customers over the years. She was carrying on exactly what his father had described: feeding people, providing community, making strangers feel human. And she was doing it alone, just as his father had been alone all those years ago when he needed help most. Elias picked up his phone and called his assistant. Patricia, I need you to pull together a research team. I want to know everything about a company called Pinnacle Development, their business practices, their financial backing, their current projects. And I need information about property tax assessments and health department violations for small businesses. Specifically, businesses being targeted for forced sales. How quickly do you need this information? Yesterday would be good. Today is acceptable. After hanging up, Elias drove back to Miller Street. The diner sat dark and quiet, the health department notice still taped to the window like a scar. He parked across the street and studied the building, trying to see it through his father's eyes. It was nothing special to look at: red brick, simple design, the kind of place most people would drive past without noticing. But his father had seen something more. A sanctuary. A place where dignity was served alongside coffee, where community was built one conversation at a time. Elias thought about his own life, the penthouse apartment with its stunning views and perfect isolation, the corporate offices where efficiency mattered more than empathy. When was the last time he'd had a conversation like the one he'd shared with Claire? When was the last time someone had trusted him enough to share their real problems, their genuine fears? His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Initial research complete. Pinnacle Development has forced out 12 small businesses in this district over the past 2 years using questionable regulatory pressure. full report attached. Elias opened the attachment and felt his anger growing with each page. Pinnacle had a clear pattern: identify valuable properties owned by vulnerable small business owners, then coordinate with corrupt officials to create violations and regulatory problems that would force quick sales at below-market prices. Claire wasn't paranoid. She was being systematically targeted by people who saw her grief and isolation as opportunities for profit. He thought about his father's words, not as William Kane's son throwing money around, but as someone who understands what that place means. This wasn't about charity or corporate social responsibility. This was about justice. About protecting something precious from people who would destroy it for their own gain. About honoring a debt that had taken his father 30 years to repay. Elias started his car and drove to the city planning office. It was time to have some conversations with the officials who'd been making Claire's life miserable. But first, he needed to understand exactly what she was up against. 2 hours later, he emerged from the planning office with copies of every complaint, every violation notice, every regulatory requirement that had been imposed on the Sunrise Diner in the past 6 months. The pattern was even clearer when seen all together: a coordinated campaign designed to overwhelm a small business owner with impossible demands. He drove to the health department next, then the tax assessor's office, gathering information and quietly making inquiries about the officials involved. By late afternoon, he had names, dates, and enough evidence to connect several city employees to Pinnacle Development's aggressive expansion campaign. As the sun began to set, Elias found himself parked outside the diner again. Claire's car was there, and through the windows he could see her moving around inside, cleaning and organizing with determined energy. She was still fighting. Still believing her husband's dream was worth saving. Still carrying on the tradition of kindness his father had experienced decades ago. Elias pulled out his phone and made another call. "Patricia, I need you to set up meetings with the mayor, the health department director, and the head of city planning. Tomorrow morning if possible. And I want our legal team to research the regulatory requirements for small restaurants. I suspect we'll find some interesting discrepancies. Should I mention what this is regarding?" Elias looked at the diner, thinking about his father's letter, about Claire's courage, about second chances and debts that could finally be repaid. Tell them Kane Industries is considering a significant investment in neighborhood development. They'll make time. As he drove home, Elias felt something he hadn't experienced in years: a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. For the first time since his father's death, he understood what the old man had been trying to teach him about the responsibilities that came with success. Tomorrow he would begin keeping his father's promise. But more than that, he would begin to understand what it meant to build something that mattered. Claire arrived at the diner early Friday morning, her stomach tight with anxiety. Today was the deadline for Pinnacle Development's offer, and she still had no idea how she was going to save the place. The insurance money had covered the immediate tax payment, but the zoning compliance costs remained impossible. She unlocked the door and flipped on the lights, then stopped in confusion. On the counter sat a manila envelope that definitely hadn't been there when she'd left the night before. Her name was written on the front in neat handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside the envelope were official-looking documents from the city planning office. Claire's hands shook as she read the letterhead, expecting more bad news, more requirements she couldn't meet. Instead, she found something impossible. Zoning Compliance Review for 847 Miller Street. Dear Mrs. Johnson, after conducting a thorough review of current zoning requirements and comparing them to historical compliance standards, we have determined that your property is grandfathered under the 1998 Commercial Zoning Ordinance. The recent compliance requirements cited in our previous correspondence do not apply to your establishment. We apologize for any confusion this may have caused. Your business license remains valid, and no additional zoning modifications are required. Additionally, we are pleased to inform you that your property has been selected for the city's Small Business Preservation Grant Program. You will receive notification of the grant amount within 10 business days. Sincerely, Margaret Chin, Director, City Planning Department. Claire read the letter 3 times before the words sank in. Grandfathered zoning. No compliance requirements. A preservation grant. It was like winning the lottery after being told you had terminal cancer. Her phone rang, making her jump. Mrs. Johnson? This is Dr. Patricia Wong from the County Health Department. I'm calling to personally apologize for the inspection conducted at your establishment earlier this week. Apologize? We've completed an internal review, and I'm afraid there were significant errors in the initial assessment. The violations cited were inaccurate. Your establishment actually exceeds health department standards in several categories. Claire gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean? It means you're cleared to reopen immediately. We'll be sending an official notice today, along with a commendation for exceptional cleanliness and food safety practices. Again, I deeply apologize for any inconvenience. After hanging up, Claire stood in the middle of her diner, trying to process what was happening. Yesterday she'd been facing impossible obstacles. Today those obstacles were dissolving like sugar in coffee. She walked to the window and carefully peeled off the health department notice, crumpling it in her fist with satisfaction. Then she flipped the sign from closed to open, and started the coffee machine. By 8 o'clock something even more miraculous happened. Customers began arriving. Not just one or two but a steady stream of people she'd never seen before, all asking about the breakfast special and complimenting the warm atmosphere. How did you hear about us? Claire asked a woman who'd ordered pancakes and eggs. Oh, it was the strangest thing. I was listening to the morning radio show, and the host mentioned this fantastic little diner on Miller Street. Said it was a hidden gem with the best coffee in the city. Claire blinked in surprise. She'd never contacted any radio stations. She didn't even know how one went about getting mentioned on morning shows. Throughout the morning, more customers arrived with similar stories. Someone had posted about the diner on social media. A food blogger had written a glowing review. A neighborhood newsletter had featured them as Business of the Week. By lunchtime, Claire was running low on ingredients and high on confusion. She called Jake Morrison, the only person she could think of who might have connections to generate this kind of publicity. Jake, did you do something? Send out emails or call in favors or something? Claire, I don't know what you're talking about. But whatever's happening, I'm happy for you. You sound like yourself again. That afternoon, Claire was restocking the coffee supplies when she noticed an envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a simple note. For ingredients and supplies. A friend who believes in second chances. She stared at the check until the numbers blurred. $5,000 was enough to restock completely, to buy the premium ingredients Tom had always insisted on, to fix the little repairs that had been piling up for months. But who would do this? And why? Her phone rang again. This time it was the utility company, calling to inform her that her account had been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. The same thing happened with her suppliers. Suddenly all her outstanding bills were settled, all her credit restored. Someone was systematically removing every obstacle that had been placed in her path. Someone with resources and connections was fighting her battles from the shadows. That evening, as Claire counted the day's receipts, more money than she'd seen in months, she thought about the mysterious coffee customer who defended her against Blackwood. Elias had seemed different from other wealthy people she'd encountered. Less concerned with appearances, more interested in understanding what really mattered. Could he be behind this sudden reversal of fortune? But that seemed impossible. He was a stranger who'd shared one cup of coffee with her. Why would he care enough to intervene in her problems? The bell chimed, and Claire looked up to see Elias himself walking through the door. He looked around at the bustling diner with satisfaction, as if he'd expected to find it exactly this busy. Elias, I was just thinking about you. Good thoughts, I hope. He took the same stool at the counter he'd occupied the day before. Business seems to be picking up. It's been the strangest day. Suddenly everything that was going wrong is going right. The health department cleared us, the zoning issues disappeared, customers are coming from everywhere. Claire poured his coffee without being asked. It's like I have a guardian angel watching over me. Elias accepted the coffee with a slight smile. Maybe you do. Something in his tone made Claire study his face more carefully. There was a knowing look in his eyes, a contentment that suggested he was enjoying a private joke. Elias, can I ask you something? Of course. What do you do for work? I mean, yesterday you stood up to those developers like you weren't afraid of them at all. And today? She gestured around the busy diner. Today feels like a miracle. I work in technology. Business development, mostly. Elias sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of the mug. And I've learned that most problems have solutions. You just need to know who to call. Is that what this is? You making phone calls? Maybe. Does it matter who's making them as long as they're working? Claire felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. It matters to me. I need to know who to thank. Thank your husband, Elias said quietly. Thank him for building something worth saving. Thank him for teaching you to fight for what matters. The dinner rush began in earnest then, and Claire found herself too busy to continue the conversation. But throughout the evening she was aware of Elias sitting at the counter, watching the diner come alive with the energy it had been missing for months. He stayed until closing time, nursing his coffee and occasionally chatting with other customers. Claire noticed how he listened more than he spoke, how he seemed genuinely interested in people's stories. When a young mother struggled to keep her toddler entertained while eating, Elias quietly asked the little boy about his toy dinosaur, engaging him in a conversation about which species was the strongest. "You're good with kids," Claire observed as she wiped down the counter around him. "I don't get much practice. My life doesn't include many children." "That sounds lonely." Elias considered this. "I thought it was efficient. But watching this place tonight, seeing how people connect with each other, maybe I was wrong about what efficiency means." As Claire locked up for the night, Elias walked her to her car. "Thank you," she said, "for whatever you did or didn't do today. For believing this place was worth saving." "Claire," Elias said, and something in his voice made her turn to face him fully. "There's something I need to tell you. Something about why I'm here, why I care about this diner." But before he could continue, a police car pulled up to the curb. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, and Claire's heart jumped with worry. "Everything okay here?" Rodriguez asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Everything's fine," Claire replied quickly. "Just saying good night." Rodriguez looked from Claire to Elias with obvious suspicion. "Sir, could I see some identification?" Elias reached for his wallet without complaint, but something in his posture had changed. The easy warmth from moments before was replaced by a cooler distance. "Elias Kane," Rodriguez read from the driver's license. His eyebrows shot up. "Kane Industries Elias Kane?" "That's right." Rodriguez's entire demeanor shifted. "Mr. Kane, I had no idea. I apologize for the interruption. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, officer. Just enjoying good coffee and good company." After Rodriguez left, Claire stared at Elias with new understanding. Kane Industries. She'd heard the name before: tech companies, real estate development, the kind of wealth that made headlines. "You're a billionaire," she said. It wasn't a question. "I prefer technology entrepreneur, but yes, that's accurate. And you've been helping me because?" Elias looked back at the diner, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. "Because someone needs to. Because this place matters. Because..." He paused, seeming to wrestle with how much to reveal. "Because my father would have wanted me to." "Your father?" "It's a long story. One I'd like to tell you properly when we have more time." Claire nodded, though her mind was spinning with questions. A billionaire had been sitting at her counter, drinking coffee and helping solve her problems like a fairy godmother in an expensive suit. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "Every morning," Elias promised. "Black coffee just like always." As he drove away, Claire stood in the empty parking lot, looking up at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. 24 hours ago, she'd been facing the loss of everything she held dear. Tonight, she had hope again, customers again, a future again. And maybe, just maybe, she had found something else too. Something she hadn't been looking for but suddenly couldn't imagine living without. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows as Claire prepared for what was shaping up to be their busiest day yet. Word had spread about the hidden gem on Miller Street, and she'd already taken 3 reservation requests for the lunch rush, something that had never happened in the diner's 4-year history. She was arranging fresh flowers in small vases for each table when Elias arrived for his usual morning coffee. But today he wasn't alone. A distinguished older woman accompanied him, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of smile that suggested important business. "Good morning, Claire," Elias said, settling onto his regular stool. "I'd like you to meet Patricia Wong, my assistant. She has some information I think you'll find interesting." Patricia set her portfolio on the counter and opened it to reveal a collection of documents, photographs, and what looked like legal papers. "Mrs. Johnson, Elias has asked me to research the history of your diner and the circumstances surrounding your recent difficulties. What we discovered is quite remarkable." Claire poured Elias his coffee and waited, her stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. Patricia pulled out a faded photograph that Claire had never seen before. It showed the Sunrise Diner from the outside, but the people standing in front of it weren't Tom and herself. "This photograph was taken in 1995, when your diner was owned by Tom and Betty Morrison," Patricia explained. "They ran this place for 20 years before retiring and selling to your late husband." Claire studied the photo. The man looked familiar somehow, though she was certain she'd never met him. "Tom Morrison was my husband's mentor," Claire said slowly. "He taught Tom everything about running a restaurant. But I never met him. He moved to Florida right after we bought the place." Mrs. Morrison died 5 years ago, Patricia continued gently. But before she passed, she told her son Jake about a young couple who'd bought the diner and were carrying on everything she and her husband had built. Claire's breath caught. Jake Morrison. I know Jake. He was Tom's best friend, but I never realized he's the original owner's son. He asked us not to tell you right away. He wanted you to succeed on your own merits, not because of family connections. But when he learned about your troubles, he contacted Elias. I don't understand. How do you two know each other? Elias set down his coffee mug and pulled out another photograph, older and more faded than the first. It showed a young man with hungry eyes and worn clothes standing behind the diner, washing dishes. This is my father, Elias said quietly. William Kane. 30 years ago he was homeless and starving, sleeping in doorways and eating from garbage cans. Your predecessor, Betty Morrison, gave him work washing dishes in exchange for meals. She fed him for 3 months until he got back on his feet. Claire stared at the photograph, understanding dawning on her like sunrise. My father never forgot what this place meant to him. Before he died, he left me a letter asking me to watch over the diner, to help if the owners ever needed it. He wanted to repay the kindness he'd received here. So when you came in for coffee, I was checking on the place, making sure whoever had taken over was continuing the tradition of generosity my father remembered. What I found was someone carrying on that tradition perfectly, while being systematically destroyed by people who had no idea what they were trying to eliminate. Patricia spread out more documents on the counter. We've uncovered the full scope of Pinnacle Development's campaign against local businesses. They've bribed 3 city officials, falsified inspection reports, and manipulated property tax assessments to force sales. We have enough evidence to shut down their operation and possibly send several people to prison, Elias added. But more importantly, we can make sure nothing like this happens to you again. Claire felt overwhelmed by the revelation. Her mysterious guardian angel wasn't random kindness, it was a decades-old debt being repaid, a promise being kept by a son who'd never forgotten his father's lessons about gratitude. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll let us help properly, Elias replied. Not just fixing problems but building something bigger. Something that would make both our fathers proud. What do you mean? Patricia pulled out architectural drawings that made Claire gasp. They showed the Sunrise Diner expanded and beautifully renovated, but still recognizably the same warm, welcoming place Tom had built. We want to renovate the diner completely, Elias explained. Expand the seating, modernize the kitchen, create a community meeting space in the back. But we also want to do something more. He pointed to another set of drawings showing the empty lot next to the diner. We want to build affordable housing there. Small units for people who are struggling, who need a safe place to rebuild their lives. And we want the diner to be the heart of that community, a place where residents can work, eat, connect with their neighbors. Claire's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the plans. It was everything Tom had dreamed of and more. A real community, built around the values of kindness and second chances that had always guided the diner. This would cost millions, she said. Money I have. Vision and heart I've been lacking. Elias leaned forward, his expression serious. Claire, I've spent the last 15 years building companies and making profits. But sitting in this diner, watching you serve people with genuine care, seeing how much this place means to everyone who walks through that door, it's the first time I've understood what my father was trying to teach me about success. And what's that? That the best investments aren't the ones that make you rich. They're the ones that make you human. The bell chimed as the morning rush began, and Claire found herself moving automatically to serve customers while her mind reeled with possibilities. Could this really happen? Could the diner not just survive but thrive beyond anything she and Tom had imagined? As she worked, she was aware of Elias watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. Not the cold assessment of a businessman evaluating an investment, but the warm appreciation of someone who valued what he was seeing. There's one condition, he said during a brief lull. Claire's heart skipped. What's that? I want to be a regular customer. Every morning, same stool, same coffee. I want to watch this community grow. I want to be part of what you're building here. Claire smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. I think I can arrange that. And Claire? Elias hesitated, then forged ahead. I'd like to take you to dinner sometime. Somewhere that's not the diner. Somewhere we can talk about more than business plans and building permits. The request hung in the air between them, simple but loaded with possibility. Claire thought about Tom, about the guilt she'd been carrying over moving forward with her life. But looking at Elias now, she didn't feel guilty. She felt grateful. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. As the lunch crowd began to arrive, Claire moved through the diner with new energy. The future that had seemed impossible yesterday was becoming real today. The diner would be saved, expanded, transformed into something even more meaningful than before. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to start building something new alongside preserving something precious. The guardian angel her father-in-law had sent wasn't just saving her business. He was helping her remember that life could hold more than just survival and memories. It could hold hope and new beginnings too. 3 weeks later, Claire stood in the construction trailer that had been set up behind the diner, surrounded by blueprints, material samples, and the organized chaos of a major renovation project. The diner was still operating during construction, but the back half had been closed off while workers laid the foundation for the expansion. Elias emerged from a conference call with the architects, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. Over the past weeks, Claire had discovered that underneath the billionaire exterior was a man who genuinely loved the details of building something meaningful. "The contractor says we can start the kitchen expansion next week," he reported, settling into the chair across from her at the makeshift desk. "But they need your approval on the equipment specifications." Claire looked down at the restaurant supply catalog spread before her, each piece of equipment representing capabilities she'd never dreamed of having. Commercial-grade ovens, a proper prep station, a coffee machine that could handle 50 orders at once. "This is still surreal to me," she admitted. 6 months ago, I was worried about affording basic repairs. Now you're asking me to choose between industrial mixers that cost more than my car. Good decisions take time. There's no rush. Elias, can I ask you something? Claire had been wondering about this for days. Why are you really doing all this? I mean, I understand about your father and the debt you feel you owe, but this is so much more than repaying a kindness. Elias was quiet for a moment, studying the architectural drawings as if they contained the answer to her question. "Do you know what my typical day looked like before I met you?" he finally asked. "Board meetings where we discussed market penetration and profit optimization. Conference calls about quarterly projections and competitive positioning. Dinner alone in my penthouse while reviewing acquisition targets. That sounds successful. It was efficient. But watching you work, seeing how you remember every customer's name in favorite order, how you ask about their families and celebrate their good news, that's success in a way I never understood before." Claire felt warmth spread through her chest. Over the past weeks, their daily morning conversations had evolved from business discussions to something much more personal. She'd learned that Elias collected vintage books but never had time to read them. That he'd learned to cook from YouTube videos but rarely made meals for anyone but himself. That his success had brought him everything he thought he wanted and left him wondering why none of it felt meaningful. "My father's letter talked about being grateful," Elias continued. "But I think gratitude is more than just saying thank you. It's about using what you've been given to create something better than what you found. Is that what this is? Creating something better? I hope so. With your help." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the main diner. Through the construction barriers, they could hear raised voices and what sounded like an argument. Claire hurried to the front, with Elias close behind. Richard Blackwood stood near the entrance, his face red with anger, gesturing emphatically at the construction notices posted on the windows. "This is fraud," he was shouting at Mrs. Henderson, one of their regular customers who was trying to enjoy her lunch in peace. "Someone's manipulating the system and I'm going to find out who." "Sir, you need to lower your voice," Claire said firmly, stepping between Blackwood and her customer. "This is a place of business." "Your place of business was supposed to be mine by now," Blackwood snarled. "Someone's been pulling strings, making phone calls, throwing money around to protect you. I want to know who." Elias appeared at Claire's shoulder, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. "Mr. Blackwood, isn't it?" Elias's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. "I believe Mrs. Johnson asked you to lower your voice." Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he took in Elias's expensive suit and confident bearing. "And you are someone who cares about this establishment and the people it serves. Let me guess, another one of her mysterious benefactors? You people think you can just swoop in and interfere with legitimate business operations? I think we can protect honest business owners from predatory development schemes," Elias replied evenly. The confrontation was drawing attention from other customers, who had stopped eating to watch the drama unfold. Claire could feel the tension ratcheting up and knew she needed to defuse the situation before it got worse. "Mr. Blackwood, I've told you repeatedly that the diner is not for sale. That hasn't changed. Everything is for sale at the right price, sweetheart. And when your sugar daddy here gets bored with playing restaurant owner, you'll be right back where you started." The insult hit Claire like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Elias stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood, you're going to apologize to Mrs. Johnson immediately, and then you're going to leave. If you return to this establishment again, you'll be dealing with my legal team instead of my patients." Something in Elias's tone made it clear this wasn't an idle threat. Blackwood looked around the diner, taking in the construction signs, the busy customers, the obvious signs of success and stability. "This isn't over," he said, but his bluster had deflated into petulance. "Actually, it is," Elias replied. "Pinnacle Development's business license was revoked this morning. Something about bribery charges and regulatory fraud. I'm sure you'll be hearing from the authorities soon." Blackwood's face went white. Without another word, he hurried out of the diner, leaving behind a silence that gradually filled with the satisfied murmur of customers returning to their meals. "Is that true?" Claire asked quietly. "About the business license?" "Patricia's very thorough when she investigates people who threaten things I care about," Elias said. "Pinnacle won't be bothering any more small business owners." That evening, after the last customer had left and the construction crew had finished for the day, Claire and Elias sat in the partially renovated diner, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset through the new windows. "I have a confession to make," Claire said, swirling her wine glass nervously. "What's that?" "When Tom and I first opened this place, I was terrified. I'd never worked in food service, never run a business, never been responsible for other people's livelihoods. I felt like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. And now I feel like I'm becoming someone I was meant to be. Someone who can build things, lead people, create something meaningful." She looked at Elias across the small table they'd set up between the construction materials. "I think you're doing the same thing." "What do you mean?" "You're becoming someone who values people over profits. Someone who uses power to protect instead of exploit. Someone your father would be proud of." Elias reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but Claire felt electricity shoot up her arm at the contact. "Claire, these past few weeks working with you on this project, getting to know you, it's changed how I see everything. My work, my life, what matters and what doesn't." "For me too," she admitted. "I thought when Tom died that was it for me. That love was something that happened once if you were lucky and then you just carried the memory. And now I think maybe love is something that keeps happening if you're brave enough to let it." Elias lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Are you feeling brave, Claire Johnson? Getting braver every day." As they sat together in the diner that was being transformed around them, Claire felt the last of her walls coming down. She'd fought so hard to preserve Tom's dream that she'd almost forgotten she was allowed to have dreams of her own. But looking at Elias now, seeing the way he balanced strength with gentleness, ambition with kindness, she began to imagine a future that honored the past while embracing new possibilities. The diner would reopen in 6 weeks, bigger and better than ever. The community housing project would break ground in the fall. And maybe, if she was very brave and very lucky, she would discover that life could offer second chances in love as well as business. Tom would have liked Elias, she realized. He would have appreciated the way Elias listened to people's stories, the way he worked with his hands alongside the construction crew, the way he made her laugh without making her feel guilty about finding joy again. "Elias," she said softly, "thank you. For saving the diner, for keeping your father's promise, for helping me remember who I want to be. Thank you for showing me what I was missing in my life." As the last light faded from the windows, they sat together planning not just the diner's future, but their own. And for the first time since Tom's death, Claire felt truly alive again. The city council meeting was packed beyond capacity, with standing room only in the back of the chamber. Claire sat in the front row, her hands folded nervously in her lap as she watched the proceedings unfold. Beside her, Elias projected calm confidence, but she could see the tension in his jaw as they waited for their agenda item to be called. Item 17, the council president announced. Public hearing regarding allegations of regulatory misconduct in the Miller Street Business District. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of investigations, depositions and legal maneuvering. Patricia Wong had assembled a team of lawyers and investigators who'd uncovered a web of corruption that reached deep into the city's regulatory apparatus. First to speak is Mrs. Claire Johnson, owner of the Sunrise Diner. Claire stood on shaking legs and walked to the podium. The chamber was filled with familiar faces, customers from the diner, other business owners who'd been targeted by Pinnacle Development, reporters who'd been following the story as it unfolded. "My name is Claire Johnson," she began, her voice stronger than she felt. 6 months ago, I was a grieving widow trying to keep my late husband's dream alive. The Sunrise Diner was struggling, but it was honest struggle, the normal challenges any small business faces. She looked out at the audience and saw encouraging nods from people who understood exactly what she meant. Then Pinnacle Development decided they wanted our property. What followed was a coordinated campaign of harassment designed to force me out of business. Fake health violations, impossible zoning requirements, mysterious problems that appeared overnight and disappeared just as quickly when the pressure became public. Council member Janet Stevens leaned forward. Mrs. Johnson, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them? We have extensive evidence, Elias said, standing and moving to join Claire at the podium. If I may, I'd like to present our findings. The council president nodded, and Elias activated the presentation system. The first slide showed a timeline of violations and complaints filed against businesses in the Miller Street district over the past 2 years. This chart shows a clear pattern, Elias explained, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's sound system. Pinnacle Development would identify a property they wanted to acquire, then within weeks, that business would face a cascade of regulatory problems. The next slide showed financial records. Our investigation revealed payments from Pinnacle Development to several city employees, including Health Inspector Dale Morrison, Zoning Officer Linda Marsh, and Tax Assessor Kevin Hughes. A murmur ran through the audience. These were names people recognized, officials who'd been part of the city government for years. The payments were disguised as consulting fees, but the timing corresponds exactly with the regulatory pressure applied to targeted businesses. Councilmember Robert Kim looked troubled. Mr. Kane, are you alleging that city employees accepted bribes to falsify inspection reports? I'm stating it as fact, backed by financial records, email communications, and sworn testimony from affected business owners. The presentation continued with damning evidence, emails discussing which businesses to target next, recorded phone calls arranging fake violations, bank records showing the flow of money from Pinnacle to corrupt officials. When Elias finished, the chamber erupted in angry conversation. Council members huddled together in urgent discussion while reporters frantically took notes. At this time, the council president announced, "We'll hear from any other affected business owners who wish to speak." One by one they came forward. Mrs. Garcia from the closed flower shop, describing how impossible fire code requirements had forced her out. Eddie Martinez from the auto repair shop, explaining how suddenly his business license was suspended for violations that had never existed before. A dozen small business owners telling similar stories of systematic harassment and financial ruin. "This is more than fraud," declared Councilmember Stevens. "This is an assault on the economic foundation of our community." When the public comment period ended, the council voted unanimously to launch a full criminal investigation and immediately suspend the employees involved. They also voted to establish a small business protection fund and to review all regulatory actions taken in the Miller Street district over the past 3 years. Outside the council chambers, Claire was surrounded by reporters and well-wishers. The story had captured public attention as a David and Goliath struggle between community values and corporate greed. "Mrs. Johnson, how does it feel to know that justice will be served?" asked a reporter from the local television station. "It feels good, but it's not just about me," Claire replied. "It's about making sure no other small business owner has to face what we've been through. It's about protecting the places that make neighborhoods feel like communities." "Will you be expanding your operations?" "Yes, we're planning a complete renovation and expansion of the Sunrise Diner, along with affordable housing units that will serve people who need a second chance, just like this neighborhood gave us." Later that evening, Claire and Elias celebrated at a quiet restaurant across town. They'd barely looked at their menus, too energized by the day's victory to focus on food. "I can't believe it's really over," Claire said, raising her wine glass in a toast. 3 months ago, I thought I was going to lose everything. Tonight, those corrupt officials are facing criminal charges and we're planning the diner's expansion. Justice has a way of working out when good people refuse to give up," Elias replied, touching his glass to hers. "Good people and billionaire allies don't hurt either." Elias laughed. "I prefer to think of myself as an investor in community development." As they finally turned their attention to dinner, Claire found herself studying Elias's face in the candlelight. Over the weeks of working together, she'd seen him transform from a distant, corporate figure into someone warm and engaged. The change wasn't just in how he treated her, but in how he moved through the world, more aware of other people, more interested in their stories, more generous with his time and attention. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Always." When Tom and I first opened the diner, we used to talk about what success would look like. We thought it would be full tables every night, maybe opening a second location, getting written up in food magazines. And now I think success looks like tonight. Like knowing we stood up to bullies and won. Like building something that will help other people build their own dreams. She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. Like finding someone who makes me want to plan a future again. Elias reached across the table and took her hand. Claire, I need you to know something. What started as honoring my father's memory has become something completely different for me. What do you mean? I mean I'm falling in love with you. Not just with your strength or your kindness, but with who I become when I'm with you. You make me want to be worthy of the second chance you've given me. Claire felt her breath catch. The words she'd been hoping to hear but hadn't dared to expect. Elias, I've been so afraid of feeling this way. Afraid it meant I was betraying Tom's memory or moving on too quickly. And now I think Tom would be happy that I found someone who values the same things he did. Someone who sees the diner the way he saw it, not just as a business, but as a way to make the world a little bit better. They left the restaurant hand in hand, walking slowly through the downtown streets that sparkled with evening lights. For the first time in months, Claire felt like the future was full of possibilities rather than obstacles. The grand reopening is in 4 weeks, she said as they reached her car. Are you nervous? Terrified. But good terrified. The kind that means you're about to do something important. Elias pulled her closer, and Claire felt her heart racing as he looked down at her with an expression that made her feel beautiful and cherished and completely safe. Claire Johnson, you are the strongest, most inspiring woman I've ever met. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life watching you build amazing things. When he kissed her, Claire felt the last of her reservations melt away. This wasn't about replacing what she'd lost with Tom. This was about adding something new and wonderful to the foundation they'd built together. The future was bright, and for the first time in a long time, Claire couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. The Sunrise Diner's grand reopening was scheduled for a Saturday morning in late spring, and Claire had barely slept the night before. She arrived at 5 a.m. to find the renovated space transformed beyond her wildest dreams. The original red brick walls remained, but everything else had been elevated to something magnificent yet still warmly familiar. New hardwood floors gleamed under soft lighting. The expanded kitchen hummed with state-of-the-art equipment. 24 tables filled the main dining room, while a cozy coffee bar occupied the space where the old counter had been. But the most beautiful addition was the community room in the back, a space with comfortable seating, bookshelves, and large windows overlooking the garden that would soon connect to the affordable housing project. Elias emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly mussed from helping with last-minute preparations. Nervous? He asked, handing her a mug. Beyond nervous. What if people don't like the changes? What if we've lost the feeling that made this place special? Claire, look around. This is still your diner. It's still Tom's dream. We just gave it room to grow. She walked through the space, touching familiar objects that had been preserved. Tom's original coffee machine, now restored and gleaming, the chalkboard where they'd written daily specials, the corner booth where the book club had met. The first customer who comes through that door, she said, I'm going to be watching their face. If they smile, really smile, then I'll know we did this right. At exactly 7 a.m., Claire unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to open. She didn't have to wait long for her answer. Mrs. Garcia was the first person through the door, and her face lit up with pure joy when she saw the renovated space. Claire. Oh my goodness, this is beautiful. It's the same diner but somehow completely new. Behind Mrs. Garcia came a steady stream of familiar faces: Officer Rodriguez, the Henderson family, Eddie Martinez, and dozens of other customers who'd supported the diner through its troubles. But there were new faces too, drawn by the publicity surrounding their fight against corruption. By 8 o'clock, every table was full and there was a line out the door. I guess people approve, Elias said, watching Claire orchestrate the controlled chaos of the busy kitchen with a 6-person staff that moved like a well-trained dance troupe. The morning rush was everything Claire had hoped for and more. Customers exclaimed over the expanded menu, praised the comfortable seating, and marveled at the community room where children could play while their parents enjoyed their meals. During a brief lull around 10 o'clock, Jake Morrison arrived with his wife and teenage daughter. Claire hugged him tightly, still amazed by the revelation that he was Tom Morrison's son. Dad would have loved this, Jake said, looking around the renovated space. You've honored everything he and Mom built here while making it something completely new. I had a lot of help, Claire said, glancing toward Elias, who was deep in conversation with a young mother about the children's menu. "Speaking of help," Jake's wife Linda said with a meaningful smile, "when are you going to put that man out of his misery and say yes?" "Say yes to what?" Jake pulled out his phone and showed Claire a text message from Elias, planning to propose Saturday night after the reopening. "Any advice on how not to mess this up?" Claire's heart stopped. "He's going to propose? Tonight?" According to his very nervous text messages, yes. He's been carrying the ring around for a week, waiting for the right moment. Claire felt a rush of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and a deep sense of rightness that surprised her with its intensity. "What should I do?" "Say yes," Linda replied immediately. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. And you light up every time he walks in the room." The lunch rush was even busier than breakfast, with food bloggers, local politicians, and curious neighbors all wanting to experience the legendary comeback story firsthand. Claire moved through the controlled chaos with growing confidence, realizing that she'd found her true calling in creating spaces where people could connect. Around 3 o'clock, when the crowd had finally thinned, Claire noticed Elias talking quietly with several customers at the coffee bar. Their conversation seemed serious, and she wondered if there was another problem she didn't know about. "Everything okay?" she asked when the customers had left. "More than okay." Those were reporters from the Business Journal. "They want to feature the diner in their community impact section." "Really? Really? Claire, you've built something special here. Not just a successful business, but a model for what community development can look like when it's done with heart instead of just profit in mind." That evening, after the last customer had gone and the staff had finished cleaning, Claire and Elias walked through the quiet diner together. The day had been perfect: no major problems, dozens of compliments, and a reservation book that was already filling up for the following weeks. "I have something I want to show you," Elias said, leading her to the community room. The space had been decorated with strings of soft lights and filled with flowers from Mrs. Garcia's shop. A small table was set with china and candles, creating an intimate dining space in the room where community meetings would soon be held. "Elias, what is this?" "This is where it all started for my father. Where he learned about kindness from strangers, where he discovered that people could choose to help each other instead of just looking out for themselves." He pulled out a chair for her, and Claire sat down, her heart racing as she began to understand what was happening. "Claire, 6 months ago I thought I knew what success looked like. I measured everything in dollars and market share and quarterly growth. But you've taught me that real success is measured in lives touched, communities built, love shared." Elias reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Claire's breath caught as he dropped to one knee beside her chair. "Claire Johnson, you've saved me in ways I'm still discovering. You've shown me what it means to build something meaningful, to fight for what matters, to love with your whole heart. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a simple solitaire that caught the candlelight and threw it back in brilliant sparkles. But more perfect was the look in Elias's eyes, the vulnerability and hope and absolute certainty that this was right. "Yes," Claire whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." As Elias slipped the ring onto her finger, Claire felt the last piece of her healing fall into place. She wasn't replacing what she'd had with Tom, she was adding something new and wonderful to the foundation he'd helped her build. "I love you," she said, cupping Elias's face in her hands as he stood. "I love your kindness, your strength, your vision for what we can build together. I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love someone." When they kissed, Claire felt like she was sealing a promise that extended far beyond just the two of them. They were committing to continuing the work that had started decades ago when a homeless young man found kindness in a small diner. They were promising to build something that would help others the way they'd been helped. As they held each other in the room that would soon host community meetings, support groups, and neighborhood celebrations, Claire thought about the photograph of Tom and Betty Morrison that now hung in the diner's entrance. She thought about Elias's father, William Kane, and the debt of gratitude that had brought her and Elias together. Love, she realized, wasn't just about two people finding each other. It was about the connections that rippled outward, the kindness that multiplied, the dreams that survived and thrived because people chose to care for each other. Tomorrow she and Elias would start planning their wedding. They'd also start planning the next phase of the diner's expansion and the groundbreaking for the housing project. But tonight, they celebrated the miracle of second chances and the power of love to transform not just lives but entire communities. The Sunrise Diner had been saved, but more importantly, it had become the foundation for something even more beautiful than what came before. 6 months later, Claire stood in the bridal suite of the renovated diner's second floor, looking at herself in the full-length mirror. The space above the restaurant had been transformed into a beautiful apartment where she and Elias would live after their wedding, allowing them to be truly part of the community they were building. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, a flowing cream-colored gown that Tom would have loved. She wore his mother's pearl necklace as her something old, and carried a bouquet of flowers from Mrs. Garcia's thriving new shop. "You look absolutely radiant," said Linda Morrison, Jake's wife, who had become one of Claire's closest friends over the past months. "Elias is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." Through the window, Claire could see the guests gathering in the garden behind the diner. The affordable housing project had been completed ahead of schedule, and several of the new residents were helping with wedding preparations. Children played on the playground equipment Elias had insisted on installing, while their parents arranged chairs and decorated tables. "Are you ready?" asked Patricia Wong, who had somehow transformed from Elias's assistant into Claire's unofficial wedding coordinator. Claire took one last look in the mirror, then nodded. "I'm ready." The ceremony was held in the garden, with the Sunrise Diner's glowing windows serving as a backdrop. Claire walked down an aisle lined with people whose lives had been touched by the little restaurant's story, customers who'd become family, neighbors who'd found community, city officials who'd learned about the importance of protecting small businesses. Elias waited at the altar in a navy suit, his eyes bright with joy and nervous energy. When Claire reached him, he took her hands and whispered, "You're beautiful. Absolutely perfect." The ceremony was officiated by Pastor Williams from the community church, who had become a regular at the diner's Tuesday morning men's breakfast group. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we're gathered today not just to celebrate the union of Claire and Elias, but to witness the continuation of a love story that began long before they met." He spoke about the legacy of kindness that had connected their families across decades, about the power of love to heal and transform, about the responsibility that came with being blessed. When it came time for vows, Claire spoke first. "Elias, when I met you, I was fighting to save the past. You taught me to build toward the future. You showed me that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies. You've honored my late husband's memory while helping me create new dreams. I promise to love you with my whole heart, to build something beautiful with you, and to never stop believing in the power of kindness to change the world." Elias's voice was steady but emotional as he replied, "Claire, you saved me from a life of hollow success and showed me what real purpose looks like. You taught me that the best legacy isn't what you accumulate but what you give away. I promise to love you, to support your dreams, to stand beside you as we build a community where everyone belongs. And I promise to have coffee with you every morning for the rest of our lives." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the garden erupted in cheers and applause. As they kissed, Claire felt surrounded by love not just from Elias, but from the entire community that had become their extended family. The reception was held in the diner itself, with tables spilling out onto the sidewalk and into the garden. Mrs. Garcia had created stunning centerpieces from flowers grown in the community garden. Eddie Martinez had volunteered his catering truck to help serve the meal. The book club members had written and performed a song about second chances and new beginnings. During dinner, Jake Morrison stood to offer a toast. "My parents, Tom and Betty Morrison, opened this diner with a simple philosophy that everyone deserves a place where they belong. Claire and Tom Johnson carried on that tradition with their own love and vision. Now Claire and Elias Kane are taking it to the next level, creating not just a restaurant but a true community center." He raised his glass toward the newlyweds. "To Claire and Elias, who proved that some love stories are big enough to include everyone." As the evening wore on, Claire found herself moving through the celebration in a state of wonder. The diner was filled with laughter and music, with children chasing each other between tables while their parents shared stories and made new friendships. This was what Tom had envisioned when he'd first dreamed of opening a restaurant. Not just a place to serve food but a place where community could grow and flourish. Around midnight, after the last guest had gone home and the cleanup was finished, Claire and Elias sat alone in their diner, sharing a piece of wedding cake at the counter where they'd first talked. "So, Mrs. Kane," Elias said, the new name sending shivers of happiness through Claire. "What's next on our agenda?" "Well, the affordable housing project is full with a waiting list. The community programs are launching next month. And I got a call yesterday from a woman in Sacramento who wants to know how to replicate what we've done here. Sounds like we're going to be busy. The best kind of busy." Claire leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling perfectly content. "Elias, do you think your father would be proud of what we've built?" "I think he'd be amazed. We didn't just repay his debt, we turned it into something he never could have imagined." Through the diner's windows, they could see the lights of the housing complex, where families were settling into their new homes. Tomorrow, some of those residents would stop by for breakfast before heading to their jobs. Others would bring their children to the weekly story time in the community room. Still others would attend the financial literacy classes or job training programs that Elias had helped establish. The Sunrise Diner had become the heart of a thriving community, just as Tom had always dreamed. But it had also become something more, a symbol of what was possible when people chose kindness over profit, community over competition, love over fear. "I have one more surprise for you," Elias said, pulling out an envelope from his jacket pocket. Inside were architectural plans for a second location, this one in the neighborhood where his father had once been homeless. "Another diner?" Claire asked. "Another community. Another chance to prove that small acts of kindness can change the world." Claire looked at the plans, then at her husband, then at the thriving diner around them. 6 months ago, she'd been fighting to save one small restaurant. Now they were planning to transform entire neighborhoods through the power of community and compassion. "When do we start?" "How about Monday?" Elias grinned. "I hear the coffee there isn't nearly as good as yours." As they walked upstairs to their new home above the diner, Claire felt the weight of grief she'd carried for so long finally lifting completely. Tom's dream lived on, bigger and more beautiful than ever. Her own dreams were just beginning. And together, she and Elias would build something that honored the past while creating hope for the future, one cup of coffee, one act of kindness, one community at a time. The end. Dear amazing viewers, thank you for following Claire and Elias's journey from heartbreak to hope, from struggle to success, from loneliness to love. Their story reminds us that sometimes our greatest challenges lead to our most beautiful opportunities. We'd love to hear from you. What moment in their love story touched you most deeply? Have you ever experienced unexpected kindness that changed your life? Do you believe in the power of community to transform neighborhoods? What would you do if you had the resources to help struggling small businesses in your area? Your thoughts and experiences help us understand what stories matter most to you. Please share your comments below. We read every single one. With gratitude for your time and attention, the storytelling team.